So it's really exciting to see everybody again, and I just need a hug.
When did you learn you were going to get traded? Was it on Saturday? Was it on Sunday?
The lecture hall at the University of Iowa hummed with the low, restless energy of students running on little sleep and too much pressure as Professor Dr. Margaret Thornfield swept in with her familiar severity. Her posture rigid, her expression unreadable, a thick stack of papers in her arms carrying the unspoken promise of judgment. Unaware that in the far back corner of the room sat a tall blonde student slouched into an unforgiving plastic chair, wrapped in a creased Iowa Hawkeyes warm-up jacket, her basketball kit bag still damp with condensation from an early morning training session. And what Dr. Thornfield could not possibly have known in that moment was that this visibly exhausted student-athlete was about to dismantle every assumption she held about intellect, discipline, and the supposed divide between physical excellence and academic brilliance, setting off a quiet but profound shift that would linger far beyond that single lecture. Caitlin Clark had walked into her advanced mathematical theory class straight from 3 relentless hours on the practice court, where she had repeated her 3-point shots until muscle memory overtook conscious thought, dark shadows beneath her eyes and faint grass stains still clinging to her shoes from outdoor drills. Yet beneath that worn exterior sat a mind as sharp and restless as her competitive edge. Dr. Thornfield, a celebrated mathematician with over 20 years of teaching behind her and a reputation for rigor that unsettled even the most confident students, noticed Caitlin immediately, the morning sunlight cutting through the tall windows and stretching shadows across the tiered rows of desks where 60 students sat in varying states of alertness, and to Thornfield, whose silver hair was pulled tightly back and whose wire-rimmed glasses reflected the glare of fluorescent lights. The presence of a visibly fatigued athlete in her lecture hall confirmed a belief she had carried for years, that true intellectual achieve. Student-athletes, however disciplined in their sport, inevitably diluted academic purity with distraction. As she began her lecture on advanced calculus applications, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone long accustomed to command, her gaze repeatedly drifted towards Caitlin, who appeared, at least on the surface, to be fighting sleep in the back row. And when Dr. Thornfield announced that the day's topic would be trajectory optimization, she allowed a pointed remark to slip into the room, noting that such concepts required deep analytical thinking rather than mere memorization, something she suggested was increasingly rare among students who split their attention between academics and extracurricular pursuits, a comment that rippled uncomfortably through the hall and drew several glances towards Caitlin, who straightened in her seat, jaw tightening not in embarrassment but in resolve, as the same competitive fire that drove her dominance on the basketball court flared quietly behind her tired eyes. As the lecture progressed, equations grew more complex and Dr. Thornfield's enthusiasm sharpened, until she reached a particularly demanding problem involving the optimization of 3-dimensional trajectories under variable air resistance, pausing with theatrical intent as she explained that the question had challenged even her most gifted postgraduate students and required not only technical skill but genuine intuition about interacting variables, before deliberately letting her gaze settle on Caitlin and inviting one of the student-athletes to demonstrate their mathematical prowess. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating, every student acutely aware that this was less an invitation than a test designed to expose perceived inadequacy. Yet Caitlin felt something entirely different rise within her, not shame but opportunity, the familiar surge that came when doubt met preparation. She had spent years navigating assumptions that her athletic success somehow diminished her intellectual capability, and now, slowly, she stood, the scrape of her chair echoing through the room as she moved down the steps with the same steady confidence she carried onto the court, her trainers squeaking softly against the polished floor. When she said she would give it a try, her voice was calm but edged with certainty, enough to suggest this would not unfold as expected. And as Dr. Thornfield gestured towards the whiteboard with thinly veiled skepticism, Caitlin picked up the marker and began to write, not tentatively but fluidly, breaking the intimidating equation into clear components, identifying variables and relationships with an ease that immediately shifted the room's energy. She explained that the problem was not merely abstract theory but mirrored calculations she performed instinctively every time she launched a 3-point shot from different positions on the court, accounting for distance, angle, air resistance, and rotation in fractions of a second while defenders closed in, translating complex calculus into lived experience with remarkable clarity. As she continued, moving seamlessly between theory and application, something subtle yet profound unfolded in the lecture hall. Students leaned forward, the initial tension dissolving into fascination, and Dr. Thornfield, standing rigid beside the board, found her certainty beginning to fracture as she watched assumptions unravel line by line, realizing that genius does not always announce itself through pristine appearances or narrow definitions of dedication, but often emerges through the ability to connect disparate worlds into elegant understanding. And in that moment, as Caitlin completed the solution with quiet confidence, it became impossible to deny that the boundaries so carefully constructed between intellect and athleticism were far more fragile than they had ever seemed.
This Wings team, just what excites you about joining this group?
I think that we're so young and we have so much potential, and that's exciting.
The lecture hall had begun as just another tired academic space heavy with fluorescent lighting and end-of-term fatigue. Yet it transformed into something quietly seismic the moment Dr. Margaret Thornfield's expression shifted from polite skepticism to unmistakable awe, because standing at the whiteboard was the student she had unconsciously written off, a tall blonde athlete in an Iowa Hawkeyes warm-up jacket, now calmly dismantling a problem that routinely defeated graduate students. Her marker gliding with the confidence of someone who did not see equations as abstractions but as living systems. And as Caitlin circled a crucial intersection of variables, she explained, almost conversationally, how optimization emerged where trajectory efficiency met probability matrices, translating dense mathematics into the language of basketball by describing the precise point at which distance, accuracy, and defensive pressure converged to create the highest likelihood of success. Comparison that stilled the room because it revealed not simplification but synthesis, and when she finally turned to face the class, the silence stretched, heavy and reverent, as Dr. Thornfield approached the board line by line, her trained eye searching for flaws that never appeared, her face draining of color as she recognized not only correctness but elegance, the kind of intuitive mathematical reasoning that cannot be memorized, only lived, prompting her voice to falter as she admitted, aloud, that this was graduate-level intuition, and asked how Caitlin had known to approach the problem from such an unconventional angle, to which Caitlin merely shrugged, a faint smile at the edge of her composure, explaining that thousands of hours calculating trajectories under pressure had trained her mind to see mathematics everywhere, that basketball was simply applied physics unfolding in real time, a statement that quietly exposed how often brilliance is overlooked when it does not arrive. Dressed in familiar academic signals, and as word of the incident traveled across campus, it marked the beginning of a subtle but profound shift between two women who discovered, week by week, that they shared far more intellectual kinship than either had expected, with Dr. Thornfield finding herself listening more carefully to Caitlin's contributions, recognizing a mind capable of absorbing theoretical complexity and immediately translating it into practical insight, while Caitlin lingered after lectures, no longer asking questions rooted solely in sport but probing the deeper architecture of mathematical theory with genuine curiosity, until one afternoon Dr. Thornfield stopped her as she packed her books and, with uncharacteristic humility, apologized for the assumptions she had made, admitting they were not only incorrect but unfair, an apology Caitlin accepted without resentment, observing that everyone makes assumptions but growth begins when we choose to act differently once we recognize them. A moment that quietly underscored how authentic connection emerges when vulnerability replaces pride. And in the months that followed, their relationship evolved into an unlikely mentorship, with Dr. Thornfield enriching her lectures through real-world athletic examples that illuminated abstract concepts for the entire class, and Caitlin discovering a love for pure mathematics that deepened her understanding of the game she dominated. Yet beneath this intellectual flourishing, Dr. Thornfield's personal world was unraveling, hidden carefully behind professional composure, as her husband of 30 years faced an early-onset Alzheimer's diagnosis that came with devastating emotional weight and an even heavier financial burden. The specialized treatments he required falling outside insurance coverage and rapidly consuming their savings, forcing her into the quiet agony of choosing between care and security, a crisis she concealed with the same discipline that had built her career, though its toll in tremors of her voice, disheveled precision, and sleepless shadows beneath her eyes, details Caitlin noticed with the same attentiveness she brought to the court, and after class one day she approached her professor directly, asking with unguarded concern whether everything was all right. A simple question that fractured months of restraint as exhaustion and fear spilled into words, Dr. Thornfield confessing in a near whisper that she did not know what they would do, that the costs exceeded her salary and every appeal had been denied, and what followed revealed the true depth of Caitlin's character. because without hesitation she contacted the Caitlin Clark Foundation, an organization she had established to support education, nutrition, and community wellness, and within days arranged for it to cover the full cost of the specialized medical care Dr. Thornfield's husband required, ensuring continuity of treatment and restoring a measure of hope. Yet Caitlin went further, recognizing that such hardship was not unique, and worked with the foundation to create a permanent fund for educators facing medical crises. A systemic response born from empathy rather than obligation, leaving Dr. Thornfield stunned enough to ask why Caitlin would help after being underestimated so profoundly, to which Caitlin replied with a wisdom forged under pressure, explaining that the apology she had received that day in class had mattered deeply, because admitting wrongdoing and choosing to see someone anew required courage, a lesson more valuable than any formula. And 6 months later, Dr. Thornfield stood before a packed auditorium at the University of Iowa's annual Faculty Appreciation Dinner, tears flowing freely as she honored the Caitlin Clark Foundation for its transformative support of academic families, her husband seated proudly in the front row, his treatment having slowed the progression of his condition enough to restore moments of clarity and shared joy. And as Dr. Thornfield spoke of the foundation's impact, she articulated a truth that resonated throughout the hall, that its existence symbolized the power of seeing beyond assumptions and responding to human need with immediacy and compassion, acknowledging that the young woman who created it had taught her that brilliance manifests in countless forms, and that sometimes the most profound lessons come not from textbooks but from students. While Caitlin watched quietly from the back row, the same place she had once appeared disengaged, observing how a single act of humility had rippled outward to touch hundreds of lives as the foundation expanded across universities in the Midwest, ensuring that no educator would again face the impossible choice between healthcare and vocation. And in that recognition lay the story's quiet truth, that the most transformative moments begin